So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar, the risks of WhatsApp for business communications. I'm sure you're all fully aware of WhatsApp, even though people like my son refuse to use it and keeps telling me that there's other communication platforms available. But I think we all know that WhatsApp is very widely used, and more is being used for very important business communications. So in today's digital age, privacy, security are more critical than ever, and especially when it comes to instant messaging and with WhatsApp and other platforms. Just to let you know, we are going to send out a little poll just to make sure you're all there, but also it'd be great to get your opinion around using WhatsApp and whether you're using WhatsApp within your companies. And also, please feel free to ask questions as we go through. We'll pick up those questions at the end and try and answer as many as possible. And if we don't, we'll get back to you at the end. So today we'll be discussing really why major institutions, including governments and some of the global banks, are banning WhatsApp due to serious security vulnerabilities and compliance risks. And our expert panel here, and I'm joined today by our wonderful partners at YEO Messaging. So Sarah, Alan, and Christo will be taking forward and discussing these things around the use of WhatsApp. And I hope you find it really interesting and insightful. So we've organised this webinar actually before recent headlines, and particularly the big headline of the US sharing military information over Signal. We generally did set that up. It just so happened that this that news came in a couple of days. But of course, it does raise some extremely important questions. And for me, I think it's the questions of more than just encryption, but data sovereignty. Where's the data actually sitting? What's going on? Who has access and who has control to see that data? And of course, there's a particular example in that, who was invited in and how do you control that? But then also, how do you integrate it into what you do today in your businesses? And how do you take that under your control? Because I think more and more, the more clients I talk to, we know that WhatsApp is being used as a channel, and there's got a big question marks around how secure that is, and is it under the control of the business? So look, and I've mentioned before our partnership with YEO. We're very proud to be a development and integration partner for YEO, and we'd like to introduce you to the YEO messaging platform, and a platform that's effectively designed to address these questions, providing a safer and more integrated, regulation-ready solution. So, look, thank you for joining us. Please feel free to ask some questions, and we'll answer them as we go through. And we look forward to an engaging session. And Sarah, I'm going to hand over to you, I guess, really to say, why are governments and banks banning WhatsApp?
Yeah, thanks, Dan, and good morning, everybody. Thanks for having us on. So I guess unless you've been living under a rock these past few years, you would have missed a lot of these big headlines that are happening at the moment around cyber attacks and data leaks, and actually being a cause of using consumer messaging platforms such as WhatsApp. And obviously, Dan, you've mentioned the one that we've seen recently around Signal. So in 2023 IBM cybersecurity report, they highlighted that 95% of cybersecurity breaches are actually a result of human error. This is, people clicking on links or downloading attachments that have been sent to them, or, even now, these cyber criminals are becoming very, very intelligent and sophisticated. They're creating fake login pages where then you're putting in your credentials, and then they've snapped them up, ready for things such as ransomware or fraud, credential theft, and even accessing your business system. Phishing attacks are one of the main causes of user error, and that represents 40 to 50% of cybersecurity issues as a whole. So these are the big kind of cybersecurity issues that people are realizing. But what's happening as well within WhatsApp is something that are a little bit more simple. So the fact that WhatsApp is an open platform. So that means if someone has your telephone number in their phone, they are able to send you a message. There's no control, or there's no having to accept or confirm the person that you would like to communicate with. And actually, when we went to Dubai recently, we were there for a trade show. Christo landed, and all of a sudden got a lot of text messages on or WhatsApp messages coming through. People selling him things. A lot of people sending links, or I've got this great party, come here, or all of these different messages. And we're obviously working in the space, so we know we don't click on links, we don't accept messages from random people, things like that. But if someone didn't know, and they're receiving a lot of messages one after the other, at some point, they're going to click on a link. Another thing is with WhatsApp, there's no verification. So you never know who the person is on the other end of the phone. It could be anyone. There's no verification or authentication in WhatsApp. And not only that, once you actually click on send, there's no control over what actually happens to that message. With WhatsApp and any other consumer platforms, you can copy, you can forward, you can screenshot. So there's, it's left up to the integrity of the person on the other end. So the fact is, businesses are never going to improve their cyber resilience while allowing employees to use consumer-grade applications such as WhatsApp. But obviously, we are seeing that the penny's finally dropping, and there is a trend at the moment where governments are banning the use of WhatsApp, and now corporations and banks specifically. We've seen Deutsche Bank, we've seen NatWest, and a few others are now kind of following suit. But the question really is why? And it's really simple. These consumer messaging platforms were built for consumers, not for business. So they don't have any control of corporate IP. You don't have any, there's confidential issues. There's data theft issues. There's regulatory issues. So that's why we're really seeing that new wave of banning WhatsApp and other consumer-grade apps within government and institutions. So simply put, if businesses and organizations are going to fail to use and control their communications, they will be at risk of cyber attacks, regulatory action, and data breaches.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. That's really insightful. And I guess to sort of carry on the conversation, Christo, I guess over to you to talk about sort of real-world incidents, and then what's driving this ban out there.
Yeah. Well, thanks, Dan, and good morning to everybody, and thanks for joining our webinar. So I think the way I would like to start this off is, sometimes in IT we look at things and we say, well, how big is that issue, and really how much do we have to worry about it, and how horrific is that problem? So I think I'd like to start off by saying, if you look at WhatsApp today as an organization, they have about 2 billion users. And we know approximately, it's difficult to get the exact stats, but there's about 100 million messages that are moved over WhatsApp on a daily basis. So that sort of gives you the idea of the magnitude. But for me, and what makes it fortunate for my scenario, is that I'm seeing a lot of corporates, a lot of government, almost on a daily basis. And I have like a secret trick that I use when I go and see these corporate customers, Dan, and I sort of say to them, so tell me, who in the room here has actually used WhatsApp in the last 3 days for a business reason? And slowly those hands come up and they say, yeah, well, I did it. And I'm sure if I ask the same question to people on the call today, they would say the same thing. So we know that, this problem is quite horrific, and there are a lot of companies at risk. So I guess the next thing to say, or next thing to really deeper in sort of unison with what Sarah was talking about around, what's happening in the market. But if you go down into a little bit more detail, and we talk specifically about financial institutions and banks. So a lot of these banks are obviously regulated. We all know, I'm sure, of the SEC, or the US Security and Exchange Commission. So they have a ruling which is called 17A-4. And really what that ruling is about is it's about saying, you as the bank have to be responsible for the retention, the accessibility of all electronic records in the bank. Now, of course, what Sarah was intimating was because you're using a public platform and that data is actually not in the bank's control, then essentially the bank is liable. And the banks have been levied major fines. And you can do a really quick search on Google. It's into the hundreds and millions of dollars that banks have been fined. And there's some here in the UK, there's some in the US. And that's probably why, NatWest is a really good example, banned using WhatsApp. But moving away from America and SEC, because that's an American sort of situation, and one looks closer to home and one looks at GDPR. The issue around GDPR is that because this data is now sitting on somebody else's environment, and you might not necessarily gain permission for that customer to actually be using your platform with that data being on another platform and then potentially being sold. Because this is what people don't really understand is when we get WhatsApp for free, we're really signing a contract that says Meta, who owns WhatsApp, can actually share that information. And they're sharing things like phone numbers, all the metadata, all the messaging logs. They can even profile you based on your location, based on the number of frequency of messages that you're sending. So the reality is, from a GDPR perspective, you then break a GDPR rule because you're selling your customers' information, even though it might be without your knowledge. But I think where things get a little bit more sticky, and we have a number of POCs going on right now, and this is the fact that WhatsApp is tied to a telephone number. So if you have an employee and they've been using their WhatsApp for business purposes, and that employee was to leave the company, the reality is that data follows that telephone number. So then again, it's about having control of that data. So if that particular individual was a salesperson like me, and they were talking to customers, and there was no business people within that group, only themselves, all that customer intelligence walks out the door. And of course, this is exacerbated when you talk about BYOD, or bring your own devices, because in that situation, then when you want to try and get the data back off the particular individual, it becomes very, very difficult to do that. So, and in some cases, depending on the type of data you're talking about, if you wanted to get it back off an employee, you might even be forced to go to the DPA, the Data Protection Authority, and request their permission so that you could actually then get that employee's data, or that data, or should I say, off that employee's phone. So I want to go a little bit more into detail around what we call data sovereignty, which is really an extension of what Sarah was talking about being on a public platform, and we talk a little bit more about this. So essentially, because the data is sitting within a platform, that doesn't necessarily mean it fits in this jurisdiction, in other words, a UK jurisdiction. It could be sitting in a US jurisdiction, and that's the case with WhatsApp. And in that situation, there are different laws that apply to that customer data or that data. So for instance, there could be things like the government could use that data for surveillance purposes. You could have a situation where Meta gets attacked, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that shortly, but where you have third-party access that's out of your control, and that could be an issue. And then, of course, you have the other situation, which is where I talked about earlier, where they're actually selling the metadata or selling the actual data to profile users. And again, that's where data sovereignty becomes a really important point. And that's why part of what we talk about when we talk to customers is we put it under this banner of data sovereignty, make sure it's in the right jurisdiction, and make sure you have control of that data. But saying all of this and getting right down into the meat of the discussion, I think the biggest problem is really reputational damage. And we've seen this in so many places. So I wanted to just talk about a few examples. I'm not going to talk about the signal gate, as I call it. I'll give you some examples, but I will try and sort of make them all into this year so you can get an idea. And we haven't had, a very long time this year so far. But literally every week or every 2 weeks, there's some scandal that comes up with WhatsApp. So the one I want to start with is the Labour Party and this occurred in February 2025. And really what this was, a gentleman called Andrew Gwynn. He was an MP of Denton Reddish, and basically he was dismissed from his role as the health minister, and he was suspended actually. And what that was that he was making racist comments about a fellow MP. We all know Diane Abbott, and he made some sexist remarks around the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner. And that information got leaked within that group, and that resulted in him getting fired. In January 2025, we had the Metropolitan Police, and this was a misconduct hearing. This gentleman was the head of the Black Police Association, and he was found guilty of gross misconduct and for participating in a WhatsApp group again with sexist and racist and homophobic information on it, and he lost his job. And of course, he put the Metropolitan Police into a bigger scenario around reputational damage. But if we go more onto outside government, more into business, and there's two things that I want to touch on, and this is really around reputational damage being caused by a cyber attack. So the first one is Linklaters, and Linklaters, as we all know, is probably, they're in the magic circle. So they're a large legal firm, and they were targeted by a spoofing attack, which basically fraudsters took the persona of the actual legal company, and they started sending messages to their customers, and through that they solicited funds from those customers illegally, and of course that created a major problem for Linklaters. But that was all done through essentially a spoofing attack driven over a WhatsApp account that they managed to get all the data. But this sort of ties very, very nicely into an attack I read about recently, where WhatsApp actually had to change their code because it was so severe. And this was called the Pegasus cyber attack. That was what it was called. And the Pegasus cyber attack, very similar to Linklaters, targeted WhatsApp users, and it affected approximately 1.5 million people globally. And basically the attack exploited a vulnerability in WhatsApp voice call feature. And what it did is, without downloading anything, it allowed attackers to install a spyware on a user's device without their knowledge. And on that basis, they could then attack that user. And like I say, they affected 1.5 million that were essentially affected. And then my last story, Dan, just to round this off very quickly, and it's my favorite story because, I'm a Formula One fan and I like watching Formula One. So we all heard about, in sort of end of 2024, beginning of 2025, we heard about Christian Horner. So Christian Horner, for those that don't know, he's like the team principal CEO of Red Bull Racing, which is currently the world champions in Formula One. And essentially, he was going through a deep investigation about allegations of talking to an employee and working with an employee. And this went on for about 2 months. And every day there was a press going on. They would go up to Christian Horner and say, what's the results? And it put a lot of pressure on this Formula One team. Then what actually happened is he got cleared. So they cleared him. They had an internal investigation, they had an external lawyer, they got an external judge. They all looked at it and they cleared him and they said, okay, you're now clear. And the day the announcement went out that he was cleared, which was on a race day, basically every single journalist and every single race team manager within the Formula One paddock got a list of every single message that was sent around what Christian Horner was communicating with the said employee. So, of course, what that did is it sort of defunct everything, and Christian Horner still walking with this black sort of cloud over his head around what was leaked out of WhatsApp. So, Dan, I hope I answered your question. I know it took a little bit longer than expected.
No, it did. It did, and I love your stories, Christo. You should write a book one day. I think those stories, they're great. But I always like them because they're so insightful and really eye-opening. I think in terms of what's going on, and then so thank you very much, Christo. Then over to you, Alan. I guess this may not be the most exciting subject, but it's possibly one of the most important subject to hand over to you on, and that's around the Cyber and Security Resilience Bill and the impact you think it's going to have to business.
Yeah, I always get the boring bits, but but listen, it's very serious now what's happening. Actually, the government is finally implementing legislation around cybersecurity and resilience. And there's a bill going through right now which will mean that every company would need to make sure that they have a compliance officer, that they meet and they have a risk assessment, and they have some compliance framework such as cyber essentials, etc. You are all going to have to put in place more internal procedure and processing and governance regarding cyber security. Businesses also, another major change in that legislation is businesses must report cyber incidents within 24 hours to the government. And then they need to submit a full report on the impact of that cyber attack within 72 hours. If you fail to comply, it's 100,000 per day fine. So it's a very, very serious requirement as such. And as we all know, the government needs lots of money, so they will be putting their auditors on making sure that we all comply. The other side issue, realistically, I say side issue, something that we don't really believe impacts us on business, but we are responsible for every communication that comes from our employees. And the Online Safety Act is not just aimed at consumers. It's there, and businesses are responsible for moderating and ensuring that there is no form of illicit materials going across your communication channels. So you will need to provide proof that you are complying with that. If you're in a business that serves any form of content to adults, you have to have age verification in there, and you need to, again, be able to audit that process. So reporting and transparency obligations also exist for the Online Safety Act. Basically, fines there are far more significant, up to £18 million or 10% of annual global turnover. So compliance, all of this regulation we all hate. I've seen some questions coming up in the list about even use of people sending PIN numbers and other use of WhatsApp, etc. One important thing is that we all understand we can't control anything. With WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, any of these social media or social consumer applications, you do not have a backup. You are unable to audit, and so you cannot meet compliance, which equally means you cannot respond to any form of government inquiry into your company for any form of misuse, etc. That's something else to really consider. You need to manage your communication, and the best way of doing that is to have an authenticated channel where you know everybody that's on there, and you have a auditable backup of all of those communications at all times, that should the need arise, you can go in, do keyword search or search on the particular person, and you can actually produce the detail. That's about it, Dan. Really, I think it is.
I really appreciate that, Alan, and I guess that leads very nicely then onto the YEO messaging platform, and I'm going to ask Christo to just give a quick overview of the platform. Just to let you know, following this, we'd love to give you a demonstration of this platform and show you, more detail, the security features and the options available, the administration portal, etc. But Christo, if I can just hand over to you to do a quick overview now, that would be great, and then we can get on to some questions.
I was on mute. I hate going on mute, but I was trying to be very good. But anyway, I'll answer that question for you, Dan. So I think what I'd like to start off by saying is, what's the connection between One Beyond and YEO. Let's start with that first, I think. So a number of years ago, essentially YEO produced a consumer-driven application, which was really built with some really clever features on it that were differentiated from Signal, Telegram, and WhatsApp. And those features could be really defined as four things. The first and foremost was we're the only messaging platform that uses biometrics, in other words, facial recognition. So I can send a message to Alan or to Sarah, and I can demand that in that message that they have to have their face shown on that particular message in order for that message to be read. If it's not there, then essentially the message is obfuscated. The second feature we have is what we call geofencing. So I can send a message to somebody, and essentially when I send that message to somebody, they have to be in a certain location in order to read that message. And then I also have the capability to send a document to somebody, and essentially only if they have my permission can they download that document. But under normal circumstances, they can't screenshot, they can't forward, and they can't copy any kind of message that's sent. And then the fourth and final piece of that was we had a feature which allowed us to offer what we call burn after read, which is we send you a message, and then after a certain period of time, that message would erase itself. And those were the features that we had at the beginning, which differentiated it as a consumer app. Then we came to One Beyond, and we sat down with One Beyond, and we said, look, we want to take this product with all of these great features, and we want to make it into a business product, a product that's fit for purpose to work in the corporate environment. And we worked very closely on a specification with One Beyond, and essentially we came up with a concept of developing an administration console. And the first thing that administration console did was it created an invite-only platform. So I could say, I'm going to invite Dan, I'm going to invite Alan, but because Sarah is in marketing, I'm not going to invite her, as an example. And I could just have these key people within that messaging environment. And like what happened to me when I went to Dubai, there'd be no way that you would get all of these funny messages hitting you, and it would stop the cybersecurity risk. The next piece that we did, which again working in with our partner One Beyond, is we developed a system where we would have control over data sovereignty. So in other words, all the information that's within the messaging platform, whether you've used burn after read, geofencing, or continual facial recognition, in all of those circumstances, the data is backed up and stored. So if there was a problem, like the example I gave of the employee, leaving the company with all that sales discussion going on, the reality here is that you would have a full audit trail of all of that information. And then what we've also done with the platform is we made it like a white label. So you can actually, as a company, you can brand the solution as your solution. And that's part of where the integration work comes in, where we're looking to extend our relationship with One Beyond, where One Beyond will help us from an implementation perspective and getting installed in customers, branded as their own messaging app. So Dan, I think that sort of covers it. Of course, we're open to go into more detail if people want to go into more detail on it.
Yeah, Christo, do you think we should sort of like emphasize how if the US government was using YEO, how that would differentiate from Signal? Because one thing that I read in the transcripts of the conversations and the interviews afterwards was that JG had popped into this conversation. And the beauty of using a product like YEO, where everybody is authenticated biometrically, is that would never have existed. People would have seen the face immediately. They would have known it was an outsider. And secondly, conversations can be geofenced, which is something that we haven't really emphasized at this stage. And geofencing is critical. And it will also help with, there's one of the questions where it says about delivery of PIN numbers via WhatsApp. Microsoft are apparently using that now as a delivery mechanism. And we know that we deliver to a human, whereas WhatsApp, anybody can have that number. That's actually quite frightening to know that WhatsApp is being used for PIN numbers. albeit I guess they can. It's probably one of the least risky uses, but it's quite dangerous.
Yeah, brilliant, and thank you both. And I think just to follow up, I mentioned around, please, we'd love to show you a demo of this platform, what it is, what it looks like, and also going further in terms of how we can then integrate that into your business. So please book a demo if you'd like. I think now we'll move on to some questions in the interest of time. And thank you. I can see that a few of you have asked some questions. I think one that jumps up. We did obviously talk about WhatsApp, but there is WhatsApp for business. And does WhatsApp for business? I paraphrase the question, but does WhatsApp for business mitigate any or many of the data leakage risks?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll take this one if you like. Oh, Sarah, unless you want to take it.
No.
You go. So WhatsApp for business, Dan, is more like a chatbot. So it's not a messaging application like their normal sort of consumable messaging application. So the idea is that essentially you get some APIs and you can use it as a chatbot as a mechanism to do that. But you still have the same problem, is the data is actually stored and used by WhatsApp. So it's the same problem. And the part that I really liked when I was looking through the questions is Gavin mentioned that when he read the T's and C's just quickly now on WhatsApp, it states specifically that WhatsApp is a product to only be used for personal use and not for business. So they even stated in their terms and conditions. So I think WhatsApp for business is a different animal. What we're really talking about here is WhatsApp, the consumer app.
Brilliant.
I think just to emphasize one thing, WhatsApp for business can be used for messaging, but it doesn't meet any of the compliance requirements. And it's just going back to what I was saying about the new legislation coming in. If you have to start producing copies of conversations and moderating content, you have no chance of doing that on WhatsApp for business. It's a tool to interact with consumers, ideally through WhatsApp, for businesses to interact with consumers. I should correct that.
It also has a lot of the consumer architecture in terms of features. So you can still screenshot, you can still forward, you can still copy. Your phone number and device are what tying you to the message as well. And as you guys have said, nobody's verified still, so no one's authenticated or verified on WhatsApp Business.
Dan, I'll let you take a. We're reading the questions as we're talking, so we're kind of like, I want that one.
Well,
there's some great
Alan,
questions.
why don't you take the question you'd like? Don't let me lead the witness. Please carry on.
Yeah, sure. Well, there's some good ones, and thank you for putting the questions up, guys. It's interesting. Gavin's gone into the T's and C's of WhatsApp, etc. There are always going to be escape clauses there for them. Basically, Meta is a company that has actually built its business on spying on us all, and it's a free product, guys. Everybody should know. Nothing in life is free, and you give away your data and your privacy the moment you start using that platform. I won't preach beyond that, but we are all grown-ups. We've got to realize that. And any Meta product is the same. Beware of their new AI engine. We've just had a piece published in Forbes commenting on that, because, again, the whole objective is to absorb your data, take your data and monetize it. So there's also a comment here about WeChat, Jonathan. It's a good point. WeChat is prolific in China. It's used for commerce, but mainly around consumers. At the moment, I have to hands up, not aware of any legislation coming through in China that's going to affect businesses, but I do know that the world is aware of cybercrime. Governments worldwide are taken the impact of social media and social communication or consumer platforms very, very seriously. And I can assure you that WeChat is not going to be compliant in any way with the type of cyber legislation that's coming through. It's a brilliant product and has been highly, highly successful. YEO, at the very beginning of our company, we patented our technology in China because it is a marketplace that we want to go to, but we will be focused entirely on business. That's our sweet spot, and that's where the need exists today. And there are others, but I'm not going to hog the.
Because I think I've got a statement that'll help answer quite a few questions.
Okay.
And that's sort of what we see. So there's a lot of comments around Teams and Teams being used as the business application, and that's the scenario within most corporates in the United Kingdom. And by the way, I would agree with that. I think Teams is one of those applications that is used. The truth is, though, is the user adoption of Teams on the mobile is bad. And that's what's happening. So, IT say we provided a platform. The platform is Teams, but then the reality is what people do is they use WhatsApp. And this is what we've done, is we've built a solution that really can replace WhatsApp in that business world. That's really the gap that we fit in for. I could equally say the same thing about Slack, by the way, in the same scenario, is as soon as people revert to using their mobile phone, they prefer to use a technology that is more, let's say, consumer orientated opposed to corporate orientated. And that's the gap that we're filling. So I hope that answers some of the questions that were there, is it's this gap, which is, yes, there is Teams, yes, there is Slack, but the reality is the end users are still going to what they feel is best for them, which is WhatsApp. And that's where the problem starts. That was my sedation.
That's great. Chris, I don't know if you want to have a go. Gary Smith has an interesting question about how do you basically manage the use of WhatsApp on a BYO device, and
you can't.
We've internally, we've said internally, it's got to be a mandatory process that you use the messaging platform of choice for business. You cannot enforce it, of course, but it can be written into employee contracts and so on. And I think with the new legislation, we have to pass the responsibility down to the employee level. They have to realize that the company can be fined for them misusing the applications. And the problem is as we've had a case recently with a business where they were unable to produce the backups of conversations, and they were fined 150,000. We can't name the company, but we are doing a POC with them right now because they were unable to actually disclose the content of conversations in against a disgruntled employee. So if you want control and you want to avoid fines, you need to get very serious about it and ensure that the whole company is disciplined accordingly.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Alan. And the whole issue around bring your own device gives a whole lot of challenges to any business. So, sort of our philosophy has been, we'll send an invite to that person that issues them with a token, which allows them to be encrypted and talk on the YEO platform. But equally, we can withdraw that token at any time. And essentially at that point, that person is then cut off from the messaging application. But remember, all those conversations have been recorded. Just like when you phone your bank, they say, we're going to record this message. You would be saying the same thing to your employees. We're going to record every single message. And essentially, if something happens to that user or he leaves and he takes his device, you still have every single message. And that's what's important. there was one more thing is the question was around, what sort of classifies a business communication. So I think it varies from business to business, but Alan, as you and I recall, just a couple of days ago, we were at a medical facility where they were passing pictures of people who are potentially going to have surgery. That's a really good example. If you think of banking and you think of a broker talking to somebody about buying shares, that could be a particular situation. If you talk about any regulated company that is having conversations around technology or a process or closing a deal, those kinds of things are deemed as business conversations. So reality is, that's why if you go and just do a search, NatWest, you'll see they say NatWest and WhatsApp. If you just Google that, you'll see they've actually banned it. If you do a search on the French government, on the Scottish government, they've all banned it. And the reason is because they're worried about these things that are going to get them. So it's really out there in the public, and you can get a lot of information from the reason why they've banned them. We'd be happy to talk to you in a lot of detail if required.
That's brilliant. And with a few minutes to go, I think we'll begin to wrap it up. There is one question there that Sarah's kindly answered, and it was, how do you spell the name of this app? And of course, we've said it's YEO messaging, Yankee Echo Oscar messaging, or
your eyes only.
Your eyes only. Yeah, and I think that's a great great way of sort of positioning this messaging platform. So what I'll do, I'll take that opportunity to wrap up. I thank you, Sarah, Alan, and Christo, for your insights. I thank you all for joining, and I hope that's been really insightful. And like I say, please feel free to book a demo. We'd love to show you this, and we'd love to follow up. We will follow up with the questions that have been submitted today. So thank you all.